Hello everyone, this is Phil, user PhD21 from the Linux Mint forums. One of the questions that pops up frequently on the Linux Mint forum is, can you fully install Linux Mint to a USB stick? And the answer is yes. And it's a good thing to do. Because then you have a backup of your Linux Mint system, which you can use in case you got a hard drive failure or something like that, or as a portable version of Linux Mint, which you can stick in to any computer you happen to be around and boot up to it and have your system there, or for testing purposes. There are four wonderful editions of Linux Mint based on Ubuntu, Cinnamon, Mate, KDE, and XFCE in 32-bit or 64-bit. But in order to fully install Linux Mint to a USB stick, you first have to download Linux Mint, what they call a disk image file, an ISO file, from their website, and burn a DVD disk or burn a USB stick with what they call their live test drive installation version, and then tell that to install it to your system, like your internal hard drive, or to another drive like a USB stick or even a USB external drive. It would work faster on a USB external drive over a USB stick in most cases. Now, I have already created and booted into a USB stick with the Linux Mint Cinnamon version, 64-bit version 18.3 Sylvia, for this brief tutorial on how to create a fully installed version of Linux Mint to a USB stick. Now, obviously, if you're using just USB sticks, then you'll need two of them. You'll need one, at least 2 gigabytes, to put the installation version of Linux Mint onto, and then you'll need another one, at least 16 gigabytes or larger, to fully install any edition of Linux Mint to that. And it's pretty simple to do. And it can be done from Microsoft Windows, Mac computers, Linux computers. If you go to the linuxmint.com website and click download, you'll see the various versions in both 32-bit and 64-bit. If you're going to create a portable version of Linux Mint on a USB stick, it's a good idea to have a very fast USB stick that's durable and has a good warranty. You don't need to do that for the installation version, but if you're going to use one regularly, you want it to be fast and durable. Patriot flash drives and some others on Amazon.com and eBay are easily available, and local office supply stores and stuff like that. Anyway, as far as creating the first USB stick, you have to download the Linux Mint Cinnamon or Mate or XFCE or KDE 64-bit or 32-bit systems. It's an ISO file, and you can do that from the linuxmint.com website. And you can use UNetbootin, which is a USB stick creator on Windows, Mac, or Linux. There's another program called Etcher that works on all systems, and another one called Rufus that works on Windows. I have already done that, and I'm using a 64-bit version for this tutorial, but there are still a lot of 32-bit computers out there that people are running, and if you think that you might end up having to use your portable USB stick of Linux Mint on a 32-bit computer, then you should install a 32-bit version of Linux Mint, which would work fine on 32-bit computers or 64-bit computers. Okay. Now, as I've already stated, I have already created a USB stick with Linux Mint Cinnamon 18.3, 64-bit, and I'm booted into that right now. Now I have another USB stick, which I purposely, did not put in there yet, because some systems get confused if you have more than one USB device plugged in that could be bootable. So it's best to, disconnect any all the USB devices you have. USB drives that you may have connected before doing this, and that way it makes it simpler to determine where you're going to install the full version of Linux Mint 2. And you want to be very careful, because you could easily overwrite your existing hard drive, and that would be bad. So anyway, I'm going to plug in a USB drive, another USB drive, that I'm going to fully install Linux Mint. And it just came up. Now, if you bring up your file manager, which is called Files and Cinnamon and Nemo, you can click on that drive to mount it. Sometimes it automatically mounts, sometimes it doesn't. It's also an excellent idea to make sure that the drive you're going to install Linux Mint, fully install Linux Mint 2, is formatted, and it should be formatted as a FAT32 file system. Now, Linux Mint has an option called a USB stick formatter in the menus, and what you do is you bring that up, click on that, pick the drive that you want, that you're going to fully install Linux Mint 2, not the one you're booted into, and you have to actually click it. Okay, it already defaults to FAT32. Under the volume label, it says USB stick. Change that to something else. You could call it LM for Linux Mint 18.3, and then just click Format. It only takes a few moments, and then it says, oh, it's formatted. Boom. Then click Close. I would still recommend you bring up the file manager and locate the drive on the left, which, when you click that, it mounts it so that the rest of the system realizes that it's there. Okay, now you just have to click the Install Linux Mint option, which is usually on your desktop. If it's not, it's in the menu. So you double click that. And when that comes up, It's going to give you a welcome screen with various languages. Pick your language. In this case, I'm using English. Click Continue. So it only takes about 15 minutes to install any edition of Linux Mint, whether it's to a hard drive or to a USB stick. The next question is install the third-party software for graphics, Wi-Fi hardware, flash, multimedia stuff. I always recommend to click that. Then click Continue. Now it's analyzing my system. It would analyze your computer system to see what drives are available and what operating systems are already installed. Now, while this is checking my system out, if you already have an existing version of Linux Mint installed, and you've got customizations and applications you've installed and stuff like that, and you want that on your USB stick, there's a really great application called AppTik, APTIK. That you could boot into your regular installed Linux Mint system, run, back up all your current settings and applications and stuff like that to a folder. Then after you fully install Linux Mint on your USB stick, you could install AppTik and then restore from that. And this would work a lot faster on most computers. I'm using a very old computer with very limited memory, and so it's taking longer than it probably would on most other systems. Now it popped up with a message. The installer has detected that the following disks have mounted partitions. Now in Linux, disk drives are denoted as SDA, which is your primary internal drive, like a C drive, SDB, which is a secondary drive, which could be an internal drive, a secondary internal drive, or your first USB stick, and SDC, which would be a tertiary third drive or secondary USB stick. And it says, do you want the installer to try and unmount the partitions on these disks before continuing? If you leave them mounted, you will not be able to create, delete, or resize partitions on these disks, but you may be able to install existing partitions there. Just say yes. Now, because I booted to an installation version of Linux Mint on a USB stick, which is SDB in my case, it won't be able to unmount that, but it will unmount my primary boot drive and the secondary USB stick. Which is my destination for the fully installed version of Linux Mint. This is very similar to installing it to a hard drive, to an internal drive, but there are a couple differences, which is why I'm doing this tutorial. Okay, now here it comes up with the installation type menu. This computer currently has multiple operating systems on it. What would you like to do? And it's on erase the disk and install Linux Mint. That is not what you want to do. And then there's an encrypt, a new Linux Mint installation for security. Use an LVM with the new Linux Mint installation, or something else, where you're going to click something else, which is the same as a custom installation. Then click continue. Alright, now it shows all the drives that are currently connected to your system. Now, obviously, as I've already mentioned, SDA is almost always your primary internal hard drive. That is not what you want to install to. SDB, if you're using a USB stick, is the first USB stick. If you're using a DVD, if you booted to a DVD for the test drive, then SDB could be your destination USB stick. In my case, I booted to a USB stick with a live installation version of Linux Mint, and I have another USB stick, a secondary USB stick, and that's called SDC. Okay, and that's where I want this to go to. And so I have to click that, and you see where it says SDC1, which is the partition on that secondary USB stick. And I want to change that. So I click change. I'm not going to change the size, that's already set. But I have to tell it what kind of file system I want on it. And I want a Linux file system extended 4. You could use BTRFS, but I'm just going to pick the standard ext4 journaling file system, which is a standard Linux system. Okay, then it's going to say, if you want, you could select format the partition, but we already did that. The mount point is just the /. Then click OK. And then it comes up with a warning. Before you can select a new partition size, any changes have to be written to the disk, and you cannot undo this. Just click Continue. And now it's preparing the USB stick to install Linux Mint to. Now, underneath that, it says device for bootloader installation. You need to change that to the SDC, the USB stick. In my case, because it's a secondary USB stick, it's called that. Okay. Now, you want to make sure at this stage that the only thing highlighted is the USB stick that you want to install Linux Mint to, the destination, which in my case is SDC. So I'm going to make sure that clicked, so that's the only one highlighted, and it's the, and that the bootloader is going to that same USB stick. And then you just click Install Now. From this point forward, it installs just like it would and you just assist as a portable version of Linux Mint or for testing purposes. Anyway, I hope that helps, and I hope all of you have a great day.